Alright everyone, welcome to, I think this is part 4 of Maxwell Render Basics, where we're just going to look at emitters and how to create them, how to apply them. So the file we're looking at is this phone booth lighting file that I'll provide to you guys in the module. And when you first open it up, this should be what it looks like, right? Now there's a couple things to note here. If you look at the layers, I have things sorted into what's called emitter A, B, C, D, and these basically correspond to the lighting in A, phone booth A, B, C, and D. On the other hand, if you open the Maxwell Render plugin Windows C Manager, and you go to the materials, you'll also see emitter A, emitter B, emitter C, emitter D, and these are basically materials. Okay? Now, before we get there, you'll see there's a white, and the default, the white is basically applied to everything, basically these geometries. That is the walls of the phone booth, and then the default is applied to the ground, which is a locked sort of layer that you see in the background here. Now the only difference between these two is that the default, if I click on, if I open, double click here, and I open the default material, I go to the BSDF layer, the reflected 0 value, this is by default set to around 150, is sort of grayish color. And then the white, and remember last time we talked about white and the reflections color for white not being all the way to the up in 255, but in this case 225 or 230 is basically for all intents and purposes what pure white should look like, right? Be careful with that, because if you bump it up, then you'll get really weird results within rendering, right? Okay, so 230 for RGB values is for all intents and purposes white, white material. Okay. Now, as I mentioned in lecture, basically the way artificial lighting is treated, and in this case, you'll see in the environment, the physical sky here, but actually under the time of day, I actually have it set to nighttime, right? So it's down here, this is what, 9 p.m., right? So the sun is down basically, right? So there's no environmental lighting. Because of that, these sort of artificial lighting emitters will show up if you apply them to geometry, okay? The way to create emitters is really simple too. You go to the Materials tab, you right click, and right here there's a new emitter, and that creates a new emitter. Okay. Now you can double click on this to get into the material editor that allows you to kind of modify the emitter parameters, and you have to kind of go into the layers and click on the emitter here. Now there's a couple of things that usually you have some options here, and I usually don't change these. However, you have a choice in terms of whether or not you want to define the emitter color by a color swatch like this. So I can change this to blue, for example, and if I refresh it, it'll turn blue. Or if I uncheck this checkbox here, it'll actually base the emitter color on the sort of temperature, right? So if I pull it to the blue side of the spectrum, 9,000 Kelvin, it'll make it this sort of bluish white. If I pull it to red, the red side, it'll make this sort of yellowish thing. Okay, so that's, you can basically choose which way of specifying the emitter color you want to use, which you'll see in a little bit what it means. The other thing is the way these are also just ways of kind of specifying the power of your light. There's a watt and efficacy one. Basically, this is equivalent of a 40-watt light bulb, and you can set it to 80 or 100 watts, whatever. However, I don't find this method to be very useful, because if you apply to a specific geometry, it will actually spread that wattage over whatever surface you have. So if you have a large surface, it will kind of divide 40 watts over a large surface, and it'll be really dim. This only works if you really kind of applied to a very small surface or a small geometry. Now, because all the other methods kind of rely on, have a relationship between the surface area of your geometry, the sort of easiest or most reliable way I've found of actually specifying and having things work consistently is actually using this luminance knit CD meters squared. This option actually just ignores the surface area and the size of the geometry applied to, and it's just a simple power setting, right? And so that makes it really simple. You just set a power setting that controls how bright it is. So this, for all intents and purposes, I think this is if you're not really trying to do a true world lighting simulation, this is probably the easiest way to kind of adjust things. Okay, so I would really just go with this. Now, you'll kind of see a few different examples here, and if I kind of hide the white layer, not the ground, but the white layer here really quick, you'll see that basically in this scene, I have this, let me actually save this view. Views, perspective. Okay, so you'll see this is actually sort of mimicking a fluorescent light tube, and the second one is just like a simple circle spotlight. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind while you're applying these is that the direction of the surface actually makes a difference, right? In this case, you just have to make sure, like if it's a simple surface like this, that the direction arrow, when you use the direction command, right, this will actually be the direction that this lighting projects, right? So if you're on the other side, if you're on the back side, it will actually just be black. You won't see anything. The light will come out on this side, okay? So you have to make sure. And so in the case of a sort of rolled surface like this, the direction will actually be facing outwards, as you can see by the arrows. All right. If I flip it, then actually all the light will be projecting inwards, and this will just be a black tube. Okay, just something to keep in mind. So it's the same for these as well. You can see the arrows are pointing down, and this is just a simple surface. Now this is the most ideal geometry for applying emitters to, because the more complex like this, even a circle like this, the more complicated the surface, the longer the calculations it will take. So as much as you can, simplify your sort of emitter geometry. And these guys are just simple small wall washers, and you'll see that the direction, are facing inwards, right? So they actually sort of shoot light inwards. Okay, so those are some of the things to kind of keep in mind while we're doing this. I can actually just enable the Maxwell Fire really quick, and you'll see that some of these sort of lights start to show up, right? And if I kind of zoom in on this, that's what that actually kind of looks like. If I turn it to the back, you'll see that actually, right, this is the back side, right? So it's actually just black. So the emitters will only shoot light in one direction. Now, in the case of, let's see, if I zoom out a little bit and I zoom into this thing, then you'll see this is the purple fluorescent tube. Okay? Now, to kind of understand, you can mess with these settings a little bit. Emitter A, if I double click it, you'll see I've set its color to this sort of solid purple, right? And I've set its power to 2000. And if I make it, let's say, double that, let's say, no lock is on, say 4000, then it'll get a lot brighter basically. If I set it to 500, then you'll see in the refresh that it sort of illuminance power will go down, right? And it's a little harder to see with this because the walls aren't in here, but if I bring them back in and I refresh the Maxwell Fire preview, because you're basically bringing geometry in and out. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit. Basically, you can kind of play with this to understand the relationship between these two. And you'll see, because it's a dark scene, right, it takes a lot longer for the fire preview to kind of take hold. But if I change this back to 2000, then it gets a lot more solid. Okay, then change the color. Let's say that was that sort of dark purple, change it to blue and say okay, then this immediately takes on that sort of bluish hue or tinge. Okay, so remember, you can specify color that way, or you can specify via this, the temperature or luminance temperature gauge here, right? And you'll see as I kind of drag and click, it goes through the visible spectrum of different colors to like really whitish blue, 10,000K, really red, 200K, or you can just specify a specific color using this. Okay, so that's emitter A. Now the other thing about this is that you'll see with emitter B, the one that's just like a tiny little spotlight, it takes a lot longer for it to resolve, right? And you'll see it in this sort of like, it keeps on running and running because it's just a small spotlight. There's a lot of reflections and refractions going on, and it's just much more difficult for it to for a dark scene to resolve quickly. So in most cases, you'll want to kind of light things in as much as you can. Emitter B is really simple. Just have it's like what 95,000, and you'll see here I already have the power up to 30,000, right? And just simply because it's just such a small surface that it just doesn't have that much sort of lighting power, So if I bring this down to, like you saw, the other one was like just 2,000, it almost completely dims out, right? So there is a very sort of direct relationship between how much light you're getting and the sort of surface area of what you're sort of projecting, right? So sort of keep that in mind, at least with this way or method of setting your lights. This guy, because it's a pure plane light and there's a lot of surface area, so this guy, yeah, only 2,000 was actually enough to kind of get it this bright, right? And it's a little bit up towards the top. So it's easy to kind of just mess around with these settings to kind of get an understanding of what's happening, right? And so at this point, even when you zoom out, it's actually starting to kind of blow out some of the walls there. So this is what it kind of looks like. And then obviously you have the last one, which are these sort of wall washers at the bottom, and that's emitter D, which I've kind of set to this yellowish tinge and 1500, and you can maybe change that to 2000 and it will get a little bit brighter. All right, so that's just gonna give you an idea how emitter works, and the way you apply an emitter is basically the same as applying a material. You basically, let's say I want to now actually maybe apply emitter C to these guys. So let me hide the weather. So these guys, if I have that geometry highlighted, then I click on emitter C and then right click and assign to selected, right? Which will actually change its color. You'll see here from that sort of yellow to the bluish white, and that means that right now that's emitter C. You can also, there's a lot of options here, so you can go through these, but you can say, okay, I want to select all the objects that have this material assigned, right? So it shows me basically those guys and that flat plane on the top, right? So you can actually select objects by material this way, right? I can right click and find select assigned objects, and that'll be emitter A, which is the purple tube, okay? There is the way where actually you can supposedly drag and drop the materials into the layers like this, right? So you'll see this material applied by layer, but I have generally found that to be a little bit buggy. So try not to use it if you can. It doesn't usually work all that great, is just what I'm saying. Okay? All right, so if I back out, let's go back to the sort of set view, perspective view. So this is with, the changes that I made. This is roughly what it'll look like. And if you let it run long enough, it'll clear out and actually be, pretty close to what you would see. You'll see this sort of nice mixture of colors. It's really, really realistic and really natural. Okay? That's how basically you create an emitter like this, and then you apply it to geometry, and that's it, more or less. You can drag and drop your emitter onto the geometry if you want, but I tend to try to avoid that. Just like select it and then right click, assign to selected, and that's it. Remember, you want to avoid applying emitters to complex geometry as much as you can. The only sort of reason I'm doing this is because I just want to kind of show you how that works as a sort of fluorescent tube type thing, but that doesn't mean you want to like go around and plopping 50 or 100 of these things into your scene, because it will take you forever to calculate that. Like if you're going for this sort of glowy light effect, sometimes it actually might be easier to do it in Photoshop. Okay, just sort of remember that, unless you have a lot of computation time on your hands. All right. So that's the Maxwell Fire preview. If you let it run long enough, basically what that should look like is something very similar to this. This is the original preset. I think this is maybe SL15 or 16. It takes a while, especially this one, right? You'll still see that the one where the spotlight is still kind of grainy if you zoom in, while these are kind of cleared out smooth. So you can kind of see the difference if you kind of compare these two, where the spotlight and the sort of darker environment takes a lot longer for it to actually clear out properly. So it's almost like you want to sort of avoid this if you can, right? These sort of washing lights clear out the environment a lot faster, and it'll save you a lot of time. On the other hand, if I'm looking at, and if I actually send this to render, I want you to basically look at one setting here. In the scene manager, if you look at output right here, now you'll see by default in this file, if you send it to render, I have this option, Multilight, set to intensity. Now, there's a couple things here. Intensity just means I can change how bright a light is. If I set it to color, I can actually change colors of lights. But if you kind of preset your colors like I just did using the fire, this actually just adds more computation time. It's kind of useless unless you're planning on changing your lighting colors throughout the rainbow and things like that. Okay, just like keep that in mind. And then when you send to render, you should probably get something that looks like this. And I already kind of pre-rendered this, but this is basically what it looks like in the main sort of Maxwell render window. Okay, and this is just sort of done, right? This is a saved Emixer file that I opened, and this is what happens when you basically render out the file and let it stop, right? Now this, as you can see, it's up to SL16. And you have on the right side here what's called the Multilight Mixer, right? So it's sort of like a equalizer, and you can, if you look at this little preview here, you'll see that when I kind of change the emitter A, emitter B, right? So each of these sliders corresponds to one of the emitters, and then the last one basically corresponds to the sky environment, which is at night. So it doesn't matter how much I change this because it's at night, you won't see anything. So because of that, I can sort of change the intensity of these lights and refresh it, and that will basically update into the render, and actually at that point I can save image or save it out as an image. So what's interesting is that you can then just like out of one render get multiple images. Like I can do that once, I can get one that's just this, I can get one that's just that, You'll see this one completely blows out there, and just like you can mix and match basically what you're doing, right? If you want them all or all of them to be on, right, to the sort of max, click on refresh, and then you'll get all the lighting back, right? And you can kind of fine tune and just look at the preview to kind of adjust the lighting levels to something that you feel is more appropriate. Okay, so that's the really interesting sort of powerful aspect of this. Emitter B probably wants to be a little brighter, right? So to get that a little brighter, the spotlight kind of get it to show up a little bit more, right? So that's the interesting part about this. Now keep in mind that any render with the multi-light option enabled will take longer, okay, just by default. So this isn't something you should be doing, 30 minutes before your review. It's something that you can try if, let's say, you're going to sleep and you just want to let it run overnight, let it run. I think even this one ran for like maybe 2 hours, right? You see the time passed, although I did it on a mixture of my laptop and my desktop, so obviously my desktop is a lot faster. So if I ran it on my desktop, it might have taken 45 minutes or something like that, okay? So sort of keep that in mind. Now these files, these Emixer files, because they store all of this lighting data as a sort of high dynamic range image, they tend to be pretty big, okay? So that's why, for example, this file that we're looking at, the phone booth lighting file, this Emixer file, this is about 100 something megabytes. This Emixer file is 125 megabytes. As another example, there's a night view, which I'm showing you right now. This night view file, 1800 by 2400 pixels, right? This is 270 megabytes, right? So they're fairly large. Just sort of keep that in mind. But because of that, they still have like this sort of versatility. So this this scene, you'll see that I've set up both here. If you ignore the ISO and the shutter, and we keep those two values constant. Obviously, you can change them if you want, but you'll see that if you look at the preview, I can sort of dial down my lighting and refresh it, and this will be as if the scene had all the artificial lighting turned off, right? And I can actually make this a lot brighter, or the environment a lot brighter, and that'll update it into like, okay, this is actually almost dawnish, right? It's almost a daytime sort of situation. Whereas your sort of these geometries, and you can see these are all like basically small cylinders that I applied emitters to. They basically go black or go dark. So I'd like to bring them up just a little bit. And then vice versa, I can bring the environment down completely or just up a little bit and then turn on the lights. Right, so this is a sort of darkish night view. The really interesting thing is that the shadows are actually fairly accurate. Right, so you'll see the way the sort of light goes and the direction the shadows of the reflections of light are actually accurate to what they should be. If I bring up the background a little bit, then you'll see a little bit on the ground, the shadows of the people. These are actually 3D people, so they will cast accurate shadows. And we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. Okay, so now this is one of the most sort of interesting aspects of Maxwell Render. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you, and I'll use this file, although you can actually use this one as well. This is a little bit more complicated, and you can play with this. I'll use this as a demonstration because it's a little bit simpler. Is that so on the bottom here, what you'll find is a timeline, an animation timeline. So you can actually animate this and export it as a sort of frame sequence of frames. This is, let's say, 100 frames. You can actually set a lot of these options in terms of like how many frames there are, etc. The max number of frames, 100, 500, whatever, how many levels you need. But for now, let's say, for example, I turn all this off. right? So it's completely black, and that's at the 0 point. Now, if I go into options here and edit and turn on the auto key right here, so edit auto key, turn that on. What I can do is actually, let's say for example, drag this to frame 20, right? And then actually bump up the environment a little bit. And you'll see that if I drag it back, it automatically animates that. Okay? So it automatically makes a keyframe there and says, okay, from there to there, bump up the environment just a little bit. And then I can, let's say, go to frame 40 and then actually turn this up to, let's say, here. Okay? Turn to frame 60. And then move this, the environment all the way up. And maybe the emitter is a little bit down. And let's say go to 80. And then slowly bring the environment back down a little bit. And these lights up to their brightest. And then all the way until the end. Okay? And after you're done with that sort of messing around, you can actually play it. And you'll actually see it here. So this is basically you're animating the lights, right? And once that's done, you can actually, just the same way, you know, when you sort of refresh it at any sort of stage, right? I can refresh it at any sort of stage in the middle. So, you know, if I, let's say, drag it to here, and you'll see the sliders go as I do that, right? So as let's say I'm at frame 80, I can refresh it just to see what you're getting. Okay, this is what it would look like at frame 80. Now what's really cool then is that you can go to options, file, and then say save sequence. And what that'll do is that Maxwell Render will save each and every single one of these files. You know, in an output sequence at a sort of location. I'm not going to do it because it's going to take maybe 5 minutes. But you can save it to a place, and it'll basically save 100 frames right here. These are 100 frames sequentially as it changes like this, which eventually you can stitch together using any sort of video editing program into like a short AVI movie file. Okay, so you can actually use that one rendering view to create a sort of lighting video, if you will. Now, this is just like the simplest way to kind of set this up. I'm using the auto key, so you kind of have to be consistent. Otherwise, you can keyframe things manually if you want. But you can imagine like what you can do with like something like this, right? You can sort of play around with the timing of things and really kind of make, you know, animate these lights, right? So, or if you have a sort of interior room with, you know, 2 or 3 sets of different lights, then you can turn them all on, turn some off, on, and vice versa. So that's kind of like one of the more interesting and powerful aspects of the program. All right, so that covers emitters and multilights, and actually also basically what you just saw is how you animate multilights.